Good evening. I'm going to call the April 12th, 2022 Finance meeting to order. Jamie Puccioni is present. Jessica Brennan, John De La Rada, Bill McPartlin, Jason Moskowitz, Elena Finnan, Elizabeth Greenwood, Janet Wynn, Department Heads Seth Goldstein, Diane Percy, Ray Smith, and Lori Peretti. Oh, and Chief Koshin. Thank you. May I have a motion to approve the meeting minutes from March 8th, 2022 Finance meeting?
Motion to approve the minutes from the March 8th meeting.
Thank you. Do I have a second?
Second.
Are there any changes to those meeting minutes? Seeing none, all those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed?
I just have to
Yes.
abstain, Supervisor, because I wasn't present for that meeting. But I would note, I didn't see anything in there that would note a discussion regarding the outside counsel that was hired. I thought it might have come out from the Finance Committee meeting, but I have to abstain from voting. Thank you.
Thank you, council member. All those in favor, yes. Any opposed? Thank you. The conversation minutes are approved. Moving on to items for action.
Okay, the first item is a resolution to renew a contract with Tyler Technology for the Munis financial accounting and personnel payroll management software that we use up in our office. The second would be a resolution regarding the fireworks purchase for Niska Day. We do have $5,500 budgeted for that, and the contract has been sent along for the supervisor to sign. The third, we have a resolution regarding the annual renewal bill for the Civic Rec software for the Community Programs Department. Letter D, we have a resolution setting the hourly rate for.
I'm sorry, can we just review what is Civic Rec?
Civic Rec is our online registration program. They now bill us yearly. It used to be monthly, so that's why it exceeds the threshold, and that's why I had to come for approval. The bill totals $6,023.82.
Thank
You're
you.
welcome.
And I see Matt Yetto has joined. Thank you.
Laura Robertson, too.
And Laura Robertson. Thank you. Thank you, Beth. Please proceed.
Okay. We have a resolution to identify the fund match source for the Climate Smart Community Grant. That's a $25,000 match that the town's required. The grant was actually accepted by resolution in January.
I just want to remind you, skip D.
Oh, I'm sorry. Thank you for that. A resolution setting the hourly rate for a particular student worker to $13.20 per hour, which is minimum wage. Okay, and skipping back up to F. A resolution regarding administrative corrections to the adopted budget for water and the sewer one funds. Item G is a resolution adopting a code of conduct for the town. The draft was included in the packet. Next one is a resolution adopting a building use policy. This addresses both the town hall and the buildings over at the rec center themselves. It is still being revised and reviewed. It wasn't quite ready, but it will be by the end of the month, and I'll get that to everyone as soon as it is available. Next is a resolution adopting the Foia fee schedule that we had discussed previously. I worked with Michelle on that, and she was happy with the way that looked, so that has also been included in the packet. Next is a resolution adopting the updates to the employee handbook. That is still under revision with the HR folks. They should have that done, they were saying, by the end of this week for me to get out to all the department heads and the board for review prior to the board meeting. A discussion regarding a grant. We are working to submit a infrastructure grant through Congressman Tonko's office. It would be an 80% grant, 20% match by the town for water system rehabilitation work. We have a breakdown kind of modularized and prioritized that I included in the board's packets, just to show you what we're looking at. I know Susan has already put out the requests for the support letters to various elected officials and community groups. If we're unable to get this grant, we will end up having to bond for all this work. It's fairly considerable, but it is all water system work that does need to be done in the near future in order to keep the water system safe for public consumption. Next is a discussion regarding 2017 overpayment for utilities.
Good evening. Have spoken with Janet regarding this. I've been carrying 154.38 balance in the water rent account since August of 2017. Was a overpayment by the Army corporate utility. Check was sent to them various times, and new check was sent to them too. Never got the check back per se. They never cashed it. Christine and the water department tried to reach out to them. Then after several times, they didn't pay their penalties, so I don't know if they were using those funds. But my request is to, it was an overpayment back in August of 2017. If we can somehow give that back to them, write it off, or remove it from my utility account. So.
So my recommendation was to have Diane write a check to the supervisor. And we would take that as a miscellaneous revenue, since we did waive their late fees multiple times, because it just wasn't worth trying to fight with them and track them down. You can never get a response from anybody over there, ever. So that would be my recommendation. The auditors have told us in the past that if we had issues like this, as long as it's under $300, that it would not be an issue.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Does anyone have any objection to that? Because if not, we'll just write the check.
No objection.
No
Okay,
objection. Thank you.
Okay, a discussion, authorization to change the internet provider for town hall. It will actually be a savings going from $1,088 down to $750 per month, and have increased bandwidth and speed. So
Who is the current provider and who will be the new
I'll
provider?
let Seth speak to that.
So our current provider is Spectrum, Spectrum Enterprise. They used to be Time Warner Telecom back in the day when Bill signed the contract with them. Our contract is coming up in May. It's ending. If we renewed with Spectrum, it was going to be, currently we're paying $1,088 for the same speed that we're getting. It was going to be $879. So it would have been cheaper to stay with them if we just stayed with them. But I also went out and got quotes from Crown Castle and First Light, which are the other two fiber providers that can reach us at Town Hall. Crown Castle is currently the one that's actually providing the internet for the high school. And Crown Castle gave us a rate of $750 for 500 by 500. Currently, we're technically getting 200 by 200, but we're paying for 100 by 100. Somewhere there was a screw up. I'm not going to complain. Okay. But for that luxury, we were paying almost $1,100 a month. So we will be switching to Crown Castle.
What's the term? Is there a term on this contract?
3 years.
3 years?
3 years. And basically all the providers had a 3-year term, so I could compare apples to apples.
Thank you, Seth.
Any other questions?
So is the $750 a month for all 3 years, or is there a built-in increase over the next
No,
3 years?
that's all 3 years.
Yeah.
$750 a month. So
Thank you.
Okay, a discussion regarding the budgetary modifications that'll be coming up. And the final one is a discussion regarding the 3 bonds for the capital costs in support of the budget, which they had the public hearing scheduled for the water and sewer bonds already. And the additional bond would be for the combined equipment bond for the general and highway funds, per that schedule that I had sent out previously. So the conversation on that was whether the total amount bonded is across all the funds would be under $1 million, which we've had that discussion previously. Given the amount there and what we have in fund balance, I did not know if the board still wished to do the bonding for that with the rates going up as they currently are, or if you would rather consider using fund balance for one or all of those bonds or some variation within. I just wanted to have a conversation on it. There's some reasons, both pro and con, for doing it either way. I've talked to several board members about that. I just thought it would be nice to sit down and do it thoughtfully as a group. I don't know if people have preferences one way or the other particularly. What has been happening in the last several years is the budget has, the main equipment items have been pulled out of the budget, out of those lines, and they've been bonded for with rolling bands. Those bands, it's a little complicated. So the equipment is in the band and it rolls. It can roll up to 5 years. There've been additions every year that get rolled in, and the oldest portion gets paid off every year. So if that makes sense, it's just kind of an ongoing roll. Currently, we have rather significant debt with the work that's been done to the sewer plant over the last few years. And we know that we have additional debt that will be coming down the road for the water system, for the major repairs we need to do there. So I just thought, as we're considering what debt we have and what we may need to add, it might be wise to consider whether these short-term costs really should be bonded for, or whether we would rather use fund balance. And again, I can play pros and cons to either side if you have particular questions. It made sense over the last several years to actually use the bands process and roll them because the interest rates were so very low. It basically was allowing the town to use money without having to put it on as much on the tax base at a given time and kind of spread that out, which when rates are low, that makes sense. A low interest loan is sometimes a very useful way of funding things. With interest rates going up the way they are right now, it becomes less of a good idea. And with costs going up, we know that it's not going to get better. So I think it's also a good idea to kind of get out of that habit for at least the interim while the interest rates are higher, and either use fund balance, use reserves, budget accordingly for those pieces of equipment so that we're not carrying long-term debt and interest on those. And that's kind of a direction I think we're going to want to go in the future. So whether we start that with this iteration or wait until next year, again, there are pluses and minuses for doing it either way.
I think the balance between the interest rate presently and what it may be is the big question. And in a couple years from now, we might be saying that the interest rate was really good right now. I know it's going up, but I guess the big question is, shouldn't we still be taking advantage of an interest rate that may be considered low in another year or two when we're going back to the bonding table?
Yeah, and that's one of the reasons why I would say one of the pros for doing it one last time is that the rates are still low. They are higher than they were even 4 months ago, but they're still reasonably low and certainly well below inflation. So that is certainly a reason for doing it.
I agree.
This ties into the conversation I had with you and the supervisor about long-term budgeting and planning. We continue to go year to year to year. And even with the prior supervisor, I had asked for some long range and long-term budgeting. Let's at least get to 3 years. Let's start looking at the long term so that we don't continue to, as they say, kick the can down the road, right? Like we've been doing. Now, you're proposing that we bond a little less than $1 million, correct? Or
Correct.
That's what was on the list.
It's about half what was originally planned for with using the money that we went through all the old capital projects that had like funding. We were able to basically cut it down to about half.
Okay, that's good. That's good. And pre-COVID, the board was moving in a direction of trying to do the things you're proposing, spending down some of the fund balance to use it for, I'll just use my favorite example, police cars, rather than, bonding for those particular items. And COVID hit and we know what happened there, right? Our budget got a bit out of whack and we used way more fund balance than we had anticipated. So those are the things that we have to sort of think about and openly discuss as we are this evening as to what the right, thing to do is at this time. And I agree with you, John, that you're right. We don't know what's going to happen with interest rates. They are relatively low. I don't, so you might be right in saying we better go one more time and while we can with the rates that we have.
Beth, can you speak to us a little bit about the general and the highway fund and our policy for fund balance?
Yeah, so we do have a town policy on fund balance that once it gets to a certain level, we do need to move that into a repair reserve. The general fund is not at that level. The highway fund is. We'll need to be setting up that reserve this year to move, regardless of what we do. Even if we were to say make all the purchases that were listed for the highway department out of the fund balance, we would still have funds that needed to be moved into a reserve for the highway fund. It's actually doing fairly well. That portion of the budget is healthy right now. The general fund doesn't have the excess at this point that would be moved over to reserve.
So with that in mind, what portion approximately would need to be moved over?
I didn't bring those
About 1
specific
million?
numbers.
It's based off of the email you sent
Yeah, I don't have that
previously?
printed out in front of me, and I don't want to pull numbers out of the air without looking. So.
Understood. So I'm wondering if there's a middle way where we use fund balance for highway, which is above the threshold.
Mhm.
And given that highway and general bonding was together, pay that because we have the money,
Mhm.
and then bond for the remaining. It's a middle way,
Mhm.
moving us closer to getting away from borrowing. Thoughts?
Just to clarify, if we do do what the supervisor is proposing and use money out of fund balance to pay for the highway equipment, there'll still be money left that would need to be moved to reserves, right?
Absolutely, there would.
So we
yes.
would still be able to
Significant.
pay for what we have now and then move money to reserves to budget for future years.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Based on my calculations, we have approximately 3.2 million in the highway fund balance, and we want to bond. The highway component is is $281,677.
Correct.
If we remove that, or if we use the fund balance, that would leave us with approximately 2.9 million in highway, which would still put us above the threshold.
Yes.
And then for the general fund, we have 2.7 approximately million, and the amount we're bonding from the general fund is 83,853, which would then still leave us with a significant portion.
That's correct.
However, and then the water and the sewer, there is a significant portion for water bonding, which would be 580,978, of which we have approximately 2.2 in fund balance. And in sewer, we have 53,255 that we would want to bond for, and we have 2.8 in that fund balance.
I think that makes sense. However, ideally, I think if we could be responsible for the money that we borrow and be responsible with our fund balance, I think we're better served borrowing now at what most likely are going to be deemed still low interest rates, certainly in a couple years coming. So that's, I guess, me being in favor of bonding more is contingent upon responsible spending, which sometimes is hard in government because people see big pots of money and they think that it needs to be spent, and sometimes it does, but it makes it harder to sit on it supposedly for a rainy day, which we did for a period of time, and I think it bailed us well in difficult times. But either one of those ideas I think is good, but with responsible spending, I think we're we'd be in the plus by borrowing more now than later.
So I think the only other consideration that is on my mind is these future water projects and the need to bond for them in the future. The estimates are currently close to 17 million. And although we're applying for grant funding, we have to keep in mind we may not get all of that.
Let's have Matt. Matt, can you come up for a minute and let's just speak about the list here, right? And give the board a little bit of a perspective, if you will, on some of the priorities and the time frame, best to your ability on these items.
Yeah, so the 17 million was if we wanted to fix long-term issues. I wouldn't be spending, if there wasn't grant money available, there's a more of a conservative spending that I would propose. I wouldn't spend 17 million all at once. It was some of our larger transmission mains that are getting up to a certain age that would be an expensive project, and starting chipping away at those in sections.
Which we have done some of that
We have done,
already.
yes, and this would be a continuation of some of the work that we've done. It's larger water main that when it does go offline, affects a large portion of the town, and then some of the older 12-inch water main that affects some of our large commercial properties and some of our more industrial uses, and also sections along Route 7, which when we have issues with those mains have large impacts on traffic, and it's very unsafe to work out there as well. So when I was asked to put the list together, it was more, I was thinking of for grant money and not necessarily spending it all immediately. If the grant money was available, absolutely get all this stuff taken care of now. But if it's a more of a borrowing money or using some of our fund balance, I would do it in a more measured fashion.
Of course. I am wondering if you can speak more towards a timeline for these repairs.
It's availability of funds. I mean, the sooner you fix it, the less water breaks you have annually, which will save money over time. But some, you couldn't spend $17 million in 1 year anyway.
More importantly, I would like to know, what's the risk factor? Like what's the order of importance?
I would go to the larger diameter mains first. And also part of that money too was coating the interior and exterior of our water tanks, which I hold as one of the most important ones right now. Because that's retaining the value of an asset by letting that deteriorate and not doing the scheduled maintenance. We could end up spending more money in the future. So I made a list. I don't have it in front of me right now, but it was if we had projects, how would we move forward? If we had the money to do everything we wanted to do right now, but I did give some scoring on that list that I did give you.
Yeah, I gave it to everybody.
Okay. So
I still think I'm trying to get at the timeline in terms of what would need to be done in what sort of timeline.
So the 17 million you're saying would be long-term issues. That's 17 million long-term, are you talking 10 years?
Yes.
yeah, I would say 5 to 10 years.
Okay, so then we'd probably have to spend somewhere around $5 million within that first 10 years, if not more.
I looked at the one project that was that large diameter main that goes from where we left off from Mohawk Road up to part of the way up on River Road. That was about 3.7 million. So when you get into these larger projects, we've been trying to do about $500,000 to $600,000 of water main replacement every year to try to keep up with the aging system.
Mhm.
Those larger projects require a larger chunk of money because of the size and the complexity of the job.
And just so you know, that $500,000 to $600,000 a year has been rolled in these bands every year. So we're already bonding for those every year. This is looking at a way, for one of the conversations that Matt and I started to have is that one of the larger portions of this was the rehabilitation of the 3 water tanks, which is a little bit over 5 million. And my push with him on that was, if we're going to bond, now is the time to bond for that amount. Well, the rates are still reasonably low before they go up considerably. And we know that's something that absolutely does have to be addressed. It was at the top of his priority list. So that was our initial consideration for the grants. And then we started looking at some of these additional things that he knew were coming down the pipe pretty quickly. And when we're looking at these types of sums, a couple different percentage points add up significantly over time with the interest.
And the water tank project has been one that I've been mentioning over the last few years, at least. And I kept being told that, let's wait and see. But the longer we wait, the more expensive everything becomes, because coatings and materials are just increasing.
Okay. Any other thoughts? I'm sorry, any other thoughts?
Good.
Yes, thank you.
Matt.
Thank you. So it sounds as if we are somewhat in agreement to bond for the water and sewer components and use the highway fund and the general fund to pay for the items we were initially going to bond for.
I like that idea to bond for the more long-term projects and use our highway fund and general fund for pieces of equipment, things that are short-term, we're gonna have to be replacing faster.
I think as far as the bonding goes for this year, this is equipment that our department heads need to run their departments and adequately do the work that they need to do for the remainder of the year. But going forward, I think like Council Member McPartland said, we need to take a closer look at a 3-year plan or a longer idea of what needs to be budgeted for over the years to prevent bonding for equipment that won't last nearly as long as these bonds are lasting for. And to use your example, something like the police cars, where they last a few years and a bond lasts a lot longer than the life of the car. I think that's something that going forward we need to plan for. But again, this year, I think that these department heads need the equipment to complete their jobs.
Well, using the fund balance would not prohibit them from receiving the goods that they need.
That's
Guess it would
correct.
just be a matter of, do we want to deplete the fund balance
Mm-hmm.
as opposed to bonding at what, could be very good interest rates in years to come. I think we're better off bonding, but I think the proportion or the percentage of what we bond and what would come out of the general fund, we certainly should talk about, and it's definitely a workable figure.
I think this year it makes sense to take advantage of those low interest rates and bond rather than depleting our fund balance for sure.
It does. I think that, doing some bonding and then using some of the fund balance is a good solution, especially, with highway, as you said, with its substantial reserves that are going to go into reserve anyway, which will further help with, future budgeting. I think sort of splitting the difference is probably a good solution. And look at this list that we have here for our infrastructure and again, get our long range planning going.
Okay, yes. Given that there's a significant amount in the highway fund balance, which is it's exceeding the policy recommendation and would need to be moved to reserves. Approximately 2.2 million would need to be moved to reserves. I think it's fiscally responsible to use those funds to pay for items we are purchasing now, rather than pay interest rates in the future. And I also think, given that highway and general were combined in the bond, the items from the general fund, to use the general fund to pay for those general fund items. And I think, again, moving towards a long-term budgeting plan is the best approach, especially given our current, the global context that we're in with rising interest rates and inflation.
So how much of the 17 million to fix the long-term issues would we be bonding now? I think that's the number that we have to come up with. And I don't think we need to bond 17 million, of
No.
course.
No,
Whatever-
we are
Yeah,
definitely not talking
whatever
about
that is, if it's 2 million or 3 million or 4 or 5. And I think that brings us to the timeline of the top priority projects.
Exactly. And if I understand Matt correctly, to repair the water storage tanks, it will be approximately $5 million. And if we don't receive grant funds to do that, then we will need to bond for that in the near future.
Do we
Okay.
have a timeline on the grant? How long will it?
It needs to be submitted on Friday. We found out about it at the first of the month, and they had 2 weeks to turn everything around, which is why it's been a little bit of a scramble. I really appreciate the amount of work Matt's done to get these numbers so that we had something coherent to put together. And I believe we should hear within about 6 weeks or so whether or not we've received it. That's my understanding of the time frame, but I can't guarantee that.
Okay.
And the one portion, actually, Janet wrote me a note here, as I had not mentioned, but something to just bear in mind is this rolling, the bond anticipation notes that we roll every year that we've been using as the supplement to the budget. There's a cost of about $23,000 a year to the town for the bond counsel and the process of that, in addition to the actual loans themselves. So it is expensive. Because it has to be done properly, and it's a process. So that's another thing that just as we go forward, just kind of bearing in mind that it's everything has an expense associated with it.
Thank you. Is there anything else related to item O, discussion of the 3 bonds?
So just to clarify, worst case scenario, if we don't get the grant, we're at least looking to do the water storage tank repair as our first priority.
Yes.
Yes,
Okay.
that's my understanding.
And it may not be as high as 5 million, but I wanted to give a conservative figure.
And that's been one of our difficulties with this as well, excuse me, is that the cost of things have been going up so quickly, it's very hard to make estimates that are reasonable, because a lot of places, they won't hold prices for more than 2 weeks at a time, because they've been all over the place. So it's a bit of a challenge. We do have one item I'd like to add from the floor, if I might, a discussion regarding a sick bank. We have do you want to speak to this? You can speak.
So I think we're going to need a resolution. We have a non-represented employee who's been out for some time. In 2021, we established a sick bank to keep him on the payroll. We're now in a situation where he's waiting for disability retirement, and that is taking a very long time. We've got somebody that's been in the process for almost 2 years already. And we'd like to keep him on the payroll as long as we can. Many people that donated to the sick bank the first time had indicated that if he was going to run out of time again, they would be willing to put time forward again. So we would like to do that, but we'd like to establish some rules and procedures for doing this, because what happened was, as the first of the year hit, he earned his own time again. He earned vacation time and personal time, but payroll kept utilizing the sick bank. And I think that we need to consider that when something like that happens, there should be a policy that it reverts back to the person's vacation and personal time until that's exhausted. We just need some rules and regulations so that everybody is treated the same and it's handled properly. And this would basically only affect the non-represented employees. He's a non-represented employee, and we only put the request out to other non-represented employees for the time. But I just really want to nail down what happens if, right? Because he came in and said, oh, I got my disability retirement. And I'm like, well, now I've got it. We've got 240 hours vacation on the books and exhausted sick time. Now we've got to pay him out that time. That wasn't the case. He didn't actually get the disability retirement. He had filed for it and is still waiting. But before this happens again, because it's going to, I just want to get, Elena has reached out to the county for their policy, just so we can kind of get some stuff in writing and everything is handled properly by the payroll department and everybody's treated equally.
Well, I think you need to get that resolution to us, the procedure that you think. I totally agree. Use up that accumulated time before the sick time.
And then what happens to, and what started it was what happens to any sick time that's left, right? Because it was donated for this person. So say they retired and now there's that bank kind of hanging out there. What happens to that time? Do you disperse it back out to the people that donated it? Do you hang it as a bank that the next person might utilize or need? You know, there's some considerations there, and I just want and the reason I'm bringing it up tonight is because this person's going to run out of time. He's going to be off the payroll by May 23rd, which is prior to your May meeting. So I'm hoping that we can resolve this for this upcoming April meeting.
Thank you. Okay, moving on to items referred from public safety.
Good evening, everyone. We are attempting to hire 2 lateral transfer officers. As some of you know, recently we had one of our officers that decided to go to the state police, so opened another position. Currently, we have 4 vacancies, including that extra position that Officer Walter left. We do have 2 lateral candidates that we feel comfortable with. We went through the entire process, the backgrounds, the physicals, soup to nuts. I don't know if you want to know their names now or you want to wait for sort of the agenda meeting, but I've spoken, I believe last time we did this, I spoke about it in the finance meeting. I don't know if anybody has any opposition to that. Is that okay if I just speak about them quick? Okay. So David Powell comes from the Albany County Sheriff's Office. His 4 years experience. He does have family ties to Niskuna. His wife is from Niskuna as well as his in-laws. And Shaquille Hemmerding, who is a Niski graduate, I believe it was in 2012. He has 4 years experience currently with the Schenectady Police Department. We, again, vetted these individuals very thoroughly. They are excited about the opportunity to come to our town and be a part of our family and our department. I don't know if anybody has any questions regarding them specifically. No? Okay.
You have one in the academy now,
We
correct?
do. Recruit guest is in the academy. So we have 4 vacancies currently. That's including recruit guest who is in the academy. So there is 4 open spots currently.
And are you looking for someone else for the next academy?
We began canvassing last week for the July academy. Yes.
And how's that going?
So far, we have 2 applicants that returned letters. It's going to be a slow and steady process. I think all of the agencies in Schenectady County can speak to the fact that we're all vying for similar resources, and it's becoming more competitive. And so we need to put our best step forward to make ourselves attractive and to be a destination location. And I was really excited that both David and Shaq considered us that. So I'm excited about them wanting to invest in us just as much as we want to invest in them. So.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chief.
Okay, are there any other items? Items from Public Works? Items from Transportation? Community Programs? Economic Development? Any other items added from the floor? Okay, thank you. So that is all we have on tonight's finance meeting agenda. At this time, I'd like to make a motion to adjourn. Do I have a second?
Second.
All those in favor signify by saying aye.
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 Thank you. We stand adjourned and we'll move into our agenda committee meeting.